So a little while back, I was in a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was quite curious as to why I was so determined about defining myself as black. Why, in a world where he sees things, he's colorblind, as he said. I'll talk about that a bit later. He was so concerned as to why, as an individual, I was so concerned about my blackness and what it meant to me. And he said, "Look, you're not even black. You're brown." I think he said mahogany brown. And he didn't understand why I was so hung up in this whole thing about being black. And so for today's blog, I thought I would just do a little short take as to why blackness is really important for me and what it means to me as an individual. So here in the UK, it's October, and we are in the middle of Black History Month. This is a month that was started 30 years ago, I believe, to the day, by a couple who really wanted to highlight the whole point of, or the narrative of the Black British contribution, or the contribution to British society from people of African and Caribbean descent. Now, there are people who look like me who don't like being defined as black. They prefer to be defined by their country of origin, and they don't want to be limited by a specific colour. But for me, even though I've struggled with this in the past, I'm quite comfortable with the fact that I am a black man. It's part of my identity. And even if I don't necessarily want to label myself like that, if I go and tick in a box in the census, or if people see me on the street, or people even try to describe me sometimes when I'm not there, I know that they will use the phrase a black guy to be able to do that. Some people will be more politically correct and try not to do that, but I'm quite happy with the context of being described as a black man. It's part of my background. So as I said, here in the UK, it's October, Black History Month. For anybody who follows me on social media, you know that for the last 3 years, what I've been doing is I've been identifying 31 people from British culture of African and Caribbean heritage who have contributed to the narrative, to the story, whether it be through entertainment, through business, through literature, through education, whatever it is, that shapes British history. Sometimes this is something that gets left out of the British narrative, and remarkably, or notably so, we only represent probably about 9% of the population, so it will be dominated by a predominantly white narrative and white culture. So coming back to this point about there are individuals who say they're colorblind. I don't know how you can be colorblind you can be colorblind technically, but if you see me as a black person, brown person, saying that you're colorblind, I have an issue with that, because if you can't see my color, then what specifically are you looking at when you see me? Do you see me as opaque, or are you looking at the world through a kind of sepia tone? And even then, there's shades of brown. There are individuals as well who say they don't see race. And I'm happy for those who are in the privileged position not to see race, but there are so many things that happen in this country that are determined by race. Race is a social construct, it's not biological, but the fact is that a lot of things are determined by it. Quite recently, in the last week, we had I think it was called the racial disparity report. I'll get it right, I can't remember, I'll put it in the notes. But Theresa May commissioned a report to talk about disparity in the UK along ethnic lines. Now, some people may have a problem with the way that data is collected, but I think it's really important. If, for example, young Caribbean boys aren't achieving as well in school, for me personally, I take that on myself as a responsibility, as a member of the community, to try and help other Caribbean boys, because Caribbean is my background, to be able to raise their aspirations, to be able to see a successful black man who they may not necessarily see all the time. I want to be able to take that on as a responsibility. That's my journey. I also want to be able to do the same and affect it for young Caribbean, African, male and females, to show, look, there's something that you can attain to, even if mainstream media doesn't really represent that. So for me, this blackness is not just a label that is put on by others, but I think it's political as well. For me, blackness is about having a sense of pride of both the ancestry from where I come from, as I said, from the Caribbean, but also going a couple of generations even further back from West Africa, and being able to tap into that Bantu part of my narrative. I love that. I'm not necessarily going to play that down, and part of owning or taking hold of that blackness, whether it comes directly from the Caribbean or from Africa, for me is incredibly important, and I take pride in that. I love the fact that as a black man of Caribbean descent, that I can use things like Creole, being able to talk to the broken French, as it were, being able to talk to a lot of my colleagues in languages that people can't understand. I had fun in school being able to say to people, look, you've a goon, never go, well, got have a guy, have a gam, have a gay again. And people will look, oh my gosh, what are you talking about? And being able to do that, but also being able to do it with a Caribbean twist as well, even more Creole one. I can say to you, you put no wapa apa say, you be okay. And being able to play around with that with my friends, knowing what they were saying, there was a code that allowed us to be able to connect with each other. Yes, every year I'm able to go and celebrate in Notting Hill Carnival. And for lots of people, it's just a street party. But I know for somebody whose parents came from Grenada and Barbados, where Grenada we had traditions like jab around Juve, and we also have the soca around crop over in Barbados. There and aligning that to other festivals in places like Trinidad, there's an incredible sense of ancestry. There's an incredible sense of continuation of my blackness by being able to celebrate those events that happen. The same extends to other things like reggaeton and dancehall and dub and all those other kinds of music that inform part of who I am as a black man. To a lesser extent, but I suppose it's the same way, I tap into the narrative of hip-hop from Black America. It's not necessarily the same narrative as being Black British, but I do tap into that as part of a wider narrative of being Black. And there are other things as well, like for example, part of being Black for me is moisturizing. I know that, you know, if you don't, if for example, part of a narrative, if you have a bath or a shower and you don't come back and you don't use things like cocoa butter or other moisturizers to be able to put in your skin, your foot will look quite ashy. And yes, you see, even that term there, your foot, it's a phrase that we use in the Caribbean when we're describing anyway from your hip all the way down to your toes. And those things are incredibly important. Like, for example, I always believed as part of my black, or part of my blackness, that when you wash dishes, you have to rinse them. Going to a number of my friends in school, when I was around, going to their house and seeing how they prepared stuff and done things that made me realize, oh, that's slightly different. But blackness is all part of the narrative. It's all part of that joy. It's about the way I perceive the world, the way that I walk through the world. And it also is very much about challenging racism as well. I'm in a very privileged position as a public speaker, executive coach, and I work around the world to be able to portray a different way of blackness to some people, especially when I'm going there as a minority, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Americas. There's many times where I go and I'm the only black face, and in many respects I get an opportunity to be able to share my story. I can go into businesses and I can talk about how for a lot of black women, when they go into work, they are challenged with the fact that they can't wear their natural hair. They have to adjust their hair by either wearing wigs or weaves or doing it in a style that for some people they may be threatened by. Part of my blackness and why my blackness matters to me is being able to be in a position to challenge some of that, to say you are not treating a person equally or with equity when you're using narratives that downplays part of what is their culture. Again, when we are talking about things like stop and search, being able to talk to young black men who get arrested disproportionately in most countries in Western hemispheres, how can we deal with this? I sit down and I talk to young men and women about code switching. How, on the one hand, can I be able to sit in front of a corporate or a business audience and be able to talk in their language, but still be able to, when I'm speaking to them on a level, be able to use the verbiage and the slang and the vernacular that they're used to that will allow me to connect with them. And it's also about role modeling. I know that in many instances you cannot force that role modeling thing upon other people, but if there are other people who will look at me as a black man and say, you know, I can go within the black community and can say that, you know, I can be successful because I've seen someone else outside of the usual tones of, you know, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, all the rest of it. They can see other people who are doing things successfully. Then that role model is important. You know, I'm happily married to my wife, and there was a lot of narratives within the black community where people think that, you know, there aren't examples or very visible examples of black couples that do stay together for a while and he is a present father. And for me, part of my blackness is being able to model that, to kind of like disrupt that myth, to be able to challenge the concepts around it. And I want to finish on this last point, that for me, why blackness matters to me is because it's about black excellence. Now, people will say to me, what the hell is black excellence and how does that matter? And what is it? And for me, we had this discussion. A good friend of mine, JJ Boller, great writer and poet, go and get his book, No Place to Call Home. Please go and buy that. Support my brother. He had a discussion on Twitter a little while back, and he was asking, what the hell does black excellence actually even mean? And somebody came up with this great phrase, and it was like, black excellence is anything that is excellent and unapologetically retains cultural identity. So yes, for me, being able to talk about that narrative, about the way that I see the world, the way that I dance, the way that I consume, prepare food, the way that I see my daughters or other people within the black community are very important to me. And being able to celebrate that, some people will try to play it down. Some people say to me, why are you part of black networks, or why are you talking about promoting black women or what have you? And I'm not going to make any apologies about that, because my blackness is very important to me. And if you are part of the mainstream, and you don't necessarily have to conflict or have to have that, what W.E. Du Bois calls a double consciousness, where you're thinking about your colour and having to navigate the world, or moving into a neighbourhood and people kind of like having to give you a second look because you've got a different colour of skin. Or if you've never had to change your name on a CV, fortunately I have the name David McQueen, so I don't have to worry about that stuff. But also talking about, walking down the road and people feeling self-conscious because they see you, because you might be the only black guy in the neighbourhood or in the space. All those kinds of things people won't necessarily realise because it's not part of your makeup, it's not part of your narrative. But for me, it's for mine. And I'm very proud to be black, okay? And I say that with a capital B. I don't care how other people will be able to label it. Some people say brown, African, Caribbean, but I'm very, very proud to be black. It's something that my dad instilled for me from quite small. I wanted to be able to have an understanding when a lot of people were taking offense for these terms and wanted to disassociate themselves from that. For me, it was really important. So when I do celebrate Black History Month, when I do celebrate black culture, when I do celebrate the beauty that is black women, when I celebrate the contribution of history and literature and arts and entertainment, and also when I have to challenge the negative sides of the community, when we're talking about underachievement, when we're talking about overrepresentation in crime, for me, I'm still proud to be black. But that blackness allows me to be able to go in and have a conversation, to be able to challenge things that are and assumptions that come around being black, and I've got no problem with that. Blackness means a lot of things to other people, and I'm fine with that, whatever it means to you. Some people don't even like the term, and that's absolutely cool for me. But me, I'm very proud to be black, and I've listed a number of reasons why, and I will continue to go and celebrate it. Some people may not like it, but that's not my problem. If you have a problem with it, you just need to build a bridge and get over it. Thank you very much for listening, and I welcome your comments below.